So we're going to focus here on this idea of a large-scale genome program. Let's call it population health and the potential for that to impact across different stakeholders. And we have different stakeholder representatives here from the DOH, from M42, from a clinical perspective, and indeed, Kamraan, from your perspective, from an outside perspective, but with an involvement in another large-scale initiative around a data asset. So we'd welcome those perspectives. And so maybe if I can just ask the panel, please, to give a very brief introduction to where they come from, what their interest is in this agenda, and how, which role you play, as it were, in terms of this specific discussion. Albarah, can I ask you to just give a brief intro?
Yeah, firstly, I apologize. I'm back-to-back, so you guys are going to have
Great to have you
today. So, yeah, my name's Albarah El-Khani. I oversee the Emirati Genome Program from an operations perspective, the collection, the sequencing, and ultimately what we do with the data and the interface into the clinical domain and to the research domain. So very happy to be part of this panel.
And I will come back to that in terms of asking what M42's role been around the Emirati Genome. Stephen, can I ask you to give a quick...
Good morning. I'm Stephen Grobmyer, the Oncology Institute Chair, Fatima Bent Mubarak Center at Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi. I've had a long-standing clinical interest in germline genetics because of the clinical work I do in breast cancer. That dates back more than 15 years. When I had the privilege in 2020, shortly after I moved here, to be asked to be involved with the Emirati Genome Project, specifically to help lead the oncology flagship program. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk more about how we've utilized that to improve patient care.
Lovely. Thank you, Stephen. Mohamed, could I ask you to intro?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohamed Alameri, and I'm the section head of studies and special projects, and I'm leading the EGP from the governance side at the DOH and as the regulator of Abu Dhabi. And we're overseeing all the implementations of the genome data that we have within the EGP.
Thank you, Mohamed. And Kamraan, last but not least.
Good morning, assalamu alaikum. My name is Kamraan Shariff. I'm the head of strategy and corporate development at Nashville Biosciences. So we are the commercialization arm of Vanderbilt University Medical Center in the US. So we effectively have taken, we have an exclusive license to de-identify the clinical data and the genomic data that comes from patient care in Vanderbilt and support pharma companies with target discovery and clinical development.
Thank you, Kamraan.
And so I'm delighted to be here, very much passionate about advancing precision medicine globally.
Superb. So I hope you can see what we've got here is a mixed range of stakeholders. And I will ask them as part of the discussion here to take their perspective in terms of the impact that what this large-scale genome program can have from their own perspective, and then we'll weave that into the dialogue as we go forward. Mohamed, could I ask you just to start with just a summary of what the Emirati Genome Program is and how it links into this idea of population genomics?
So the Emirati Genome Project started back in 2019. Under the Emirates Genome Council, under the leadership of the Crown Prince Sheikh Khalid Mohammed bin Zayed. And this program so far have collected and sequenced more than 750,000 genomes, which makes us the largest non-Western database of whole genome. And we know that the data, we don't want the data to sit there. We've sequenced the data, we wanted to implement. And that's what we're doing with the Emirati Genome Project, is that how can we implement the genome data that we have within our healthcare system? And that's what we're trying to do at the moment.
Superb. So you're taking it from a healthcare perspective.
Yes.
Albarah, M42 has been one of the key partners aligned with the DOH. Could you just give a perspective on what role M42 has played in helping unlock the value in the initiative?
So M42 in 2019 was appointed to operate on behalf of the Department of Health of Abu Dhabi, the Emirati Genome Program, holistically, which means the community engagement, the outreach program, the consenting and collection of the samples, the sequencing, whole genomes 30x, and also the clinical applications that are based on the approved guidelines and working with our clinical partners. Now, I think one of the major successes of the Emirati Genome Program is really the community awareness and the willingness to volunteer a sample. It's very rare to see a program that over 70% of the entire population has volunteered a sample to a program of this scale. And this is, in my opinion, one of the major successes. Most large companies can build the infrastructure and the capabilities to do the sequencing, but that integrated community awareness and trust in the leadership within the community that this will benefit the population, I think has been one of the major successes. Lastly, on the clinical aspects, we're fortunate enough in 2025 to have already impacted over 28,000 individuals clinically through the Emirati Genome Program. That to us is a great success because the guidelines and the regulations that were set allowed us to really support our clinical partners like Dr. Stephen and others within the clinical domain, which was not available prior to the Emirati Genome Program. So this has really allowed the Emirati Genome Program data to filter back into the clinic. And sorry, I did say lastly, but lastly on the research element, so there is now a thriving environment to take this data, work within the regulations of the Department of Health and the STEER to see how we can utilize this data to support in the drug discovery, to support in the life sciences, and in academic research as well. What new innovative solutions can we find from this and integrate those data sets to bring as much value as possible? So our role is to facilitate all of this.
Great. Kamraan, I'll ask you in a second to pick up on Albarah's last point, but Stephen, would you mind just commenting on how this program has impacted you from a clinical perspective?
When I arrived in 2019 to Abu Dhabi, it was clear to me that we had some challenges ahead of us. The use of germline genetics and its value in the care of patients with cancer is unquestionable. But when I arrived at that time, germline genetics was not being done when it should be done. Patients were fearful to consent for germline testing. We would refer patients for genetic testing. It was almost never done. In fact, we're embarking on a study now to document the change that's occurred. But shortly after I arrived, fortunately, I had the opportunity to become involved with the Emirati Genome Project. And the first thing we did was we said we need to develop guidelines for testing, and then we need to turn this incredible national resource from a project designed to define the reference Emirati genome into something that we could use clinically. And with all of the partners on this stage, we've now done that. And we're in an ideal world now where once a patient has participated in the Emirati Genome Project and they show up to our clinic with a new cancer problem and we need to have their germline genetic information, we no longer have to collect a blood sample. And this is really unprecedented in the world. Now the patient will give consent in the clinic, and in a week or two, a hereditary cancer report will be generated that we can then action into care for patients. And the uptake of genetic testing has risen dramatically, and like Albarah mentioned, the culture around acceptance of testing and how empowering it can be for patients and their families has changed radically, all related to the Emirati Genome Project.
Superb. Thank you, Stephen. Kamraan, can I ask you to pick up more from an industry or a commercial perspective? What do you see as the value of these large data sets, looking almost from a global perspective, if you would? And please bring in your experience of working with Nash Bio as part of the mix.
No, absolutely, happy to. I mean, I think there's no doubt the value, if we when we do corporate presentations, the value of data is going from clinical only to genomic data paired to the EHR, and then over time with advanced analytics and advanced multimodal, including imaging, waveform, and multi-omic data. So that's the trajectory that we want to be on. I'd provide a couple of nuances. The first is by use case, and the second is by therapeutic area. I think today, if you look at where the investments are going, and I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the investment of 8 pharma companies into the Nash Bio data set affiliated to Vanderbilt. And the second is the announcement a couple of weeks ago at the JP Morgan conference on Regeneron and Illumina's investment in Truveta in the US with the aspiration to generate 10 million genomes. All of that's primarily going into target discovery. Now, I do believe that the next concentric circle or the next expansion from there is to go into clinical development, where we can use genomic profiles, the VCF report, the VCF file, I should say, to get better inclusion-exclusion criteria for patient enrollment into clinical trials. So I would say that the use case does vary, and I would say today it's primarily in target discovery and clinical development. And then by therapeutic area. Now, if you were to do a market sizing of real-world data by therapeutic area, it's, and Stephen, you would attest this, is dominated by oncology. But I think there's been enough publications to show the utility or the scientific and medical value of clinico-genomic data sets in other TAs, such as rare disease. And at Nash Bio, that's kind of our focus. Rare disease, neurology, immunology, and cardiometabolic. So that's the exciting thing, is taking what's happened in oncology and expanding it into other therapeutic areas.
Kamraan, would you just go, you mentioned there that you had a range of pharmaceutical companies who are developing precision medicine engaging with the initiative at Nash Bio. Can you comment a little bit more on how that works? What's the model there? And how did it evolve over time?
Absolutely. I mean, so the original business model of Nash Bio was we take patients that go into Vanderbilt for clinical care. Their sample, their blood sample, urine sample, saliva sample is consented for research. So rather than that sample being discarded, that sample is then, we extract the DNA. The DNA is then biobanked in robotic freezers. And it was the sample paired to the patient's EHR on a de-identified basis that was the commercialization model. Now, what's been transformative at the back end of 23 and 24 is that we were able to secure 8 pharma partners that actually paid for the sequencing of that DNA. So what we now have is 250,000 genomes paired to the patient's EHR, which is 14 years of longitudinality and very broad phenotypic data points. So that's the asset that has now been commercialized to pharmaceutical companies, with its focus being around drug discovery.
Super, thank you. Albarah, just in terms of the data set that's been built here in the Emirates, we focused initially around genomics, DNA sequencing. Is there an opportunity to extend into other omics? What would that look like in the future? Could you just comment on that?
Sure. I mean, within genomics, there's multiple sub-data sets as well. For example, we're sitting on probably one of the largest global long-read and methylated data sets, which I think is very important to see on the epigenetics component. Proteomics is critical, I think, and I think if you hear the UK Biobank announcement recently of one of the largest proteomic data sets to be developed, this is sort of the next frontier of the multi-omic approach as well. Transcriptomics and other areas of multi-omics are very important, but I think the baseline is the whole genome sequence that we have with some of the methylated data sets, and then we have the proteomic data set. But if you heard the previous panel discussion with Dr. Stewart from Arena Bioworks, the causal agents of environment on the human disease or human body is another data set that we have within our environmental science. So it would be amazing if we can combine and augment those multi-omic data sets with the environmental data sets to see new causal agents of disease as well.
Thank you. Stephen, would you just talk through maybe some specific examples of clinical use cases that you would see as exemplars of best practice that the Emirati Genome Program is enabling, will continue to enable in the future? We'd love some insights on that.
We use the data every day. Every day we use it in the clinic. It's a fully functional. I think from my standpoint, the real opportunity is turning what has traditionally been a reactive system into a proactive system. And we know of the 750,000 genomes that have been sequenced. If you were to study those 750,000 genomes, you will find a % of the population who harbor cancer predisposition genes that, if that information is known, could be very impactful to the health of that patient and empower us to prevent those patients and their families from developing cancer. The way we've traditionally done this in the United States and around the world is patient comes in, they're young, they develop cancer, we do genetic sequencing, and they've already been diagnosed with cancer. The real opportunity is finding those patients with genetic mutation before they develop cancer, and then we can prevent them from developing cancer. So with the help of our colleagues at M42 and the Department of Health, we've actually launched a program now at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi, where an Emirati who's in the Emirati Genome Project at age 25 or older can come regardless of their family history, sign a consent form, and then bioinformatically the common hereditary cancer gene panel can be provided to the patient. And if there's a mutation identified, those patients are then referred into our hereditary high-risk program. So this is just the beginning. I think we can see a future where this could be done on scale, and obviously there are ethical issues that we've talked to a lot of experts around the world about. But the ultimate vision is to unleash this information to really have a huge impact on the prevention of early onset aggressive cancers.
Superb. Mohamed, would you mind just commenting on what you see next? You know, where is this going? And from a DOH perspective, what are you supporting? What do you imagine might be the situation in the coming 3, 5, 10 years?
With the amount of data that we have from the EGP and as what Albarah mentioned, the multi-omics data, and also with the Malafi data, which is the unified health record platform. So we have the phenotypic data, we have the genotypic data, and the multi-omics. We sit on a gold mine when it comes to research and translational research, and as well as drug discovery. So that's what we're hoping to achieve. So we've started with the implementation of some let's say specialities that to include genomics within them. But we want to expand that. But at the same time, we want to expand our prevention programs as well. So the screening programs. So yes, we started with the premarital. Well, why not neonatal? Why not newborn screening, genetic screening? And with the implementations, yes, we started with oncology, CVDs, intellectual disabilities. Why not jump to the other specialties as well? And that's what we're trying to discover. We're trying to find those, let's say, mutations for monogenic diseases or PRSs, so polygenic risk scores, so we can push whatever we see into the clinic, whatever we find into the clinic. And that's, I think, what we are going for next, is that having that kind of like translation area where when we mine our data, we can push it into our healthcare system. And that would be, let's say, a huge step going forward within our healthcare system.
So it's a beautiful summary for me, Albarah, to hear the role of M42 in the mix, to look at and understand the clinical impact, the support of the DOH in not just what's happened to date, but what's going to happen in the future. Kamraan, could you just comment as an outsider looking in on this and maybe involved with a smaller scale initiative but in the US, what would be your advice to us from your perspective in terms of how we might anticipate some of the challenges that we might hit in the years ahead?
Yeah, so my hypothesis around where the industry needs to go is is the consolidation or the convergence of data, analytics, and services together. Mm-hmm. And I think that's absolutely critical because, you know, only 2 of the 3 parts of the Venn diagram, it doesn't work. Data by itself, you know, lacks, you run the risk of pharmaceutical companies or biotechs not having the experience to interrogate the data. Analytics without data is a recipe for product obsolescence. And the 2 without services is a challenge because pharmaceutical companies do not buy a pure software as a service model. So it's really all 3 components. And I'd say from our experience at Nash Bio, we found that there's varying degrees of experience that pharma companies have with being able to interrogate the data. So therefore a strong services component, both in terms of upfront curation, harmonization, bringing multiple data sets onto a common data model, and then the downstream tech-enabled sort of insights generation. To me, that's one of the most important things.
Got you. And when you think about these initiatives, you know, I know Nash Bio is around a certain health system in the US. The Emirati Genome Program is a sovereign program in this country. Do you think that does present opportunities for future collaboration? That there is an interface here that can be managed? Any comments on that?
Yeah. So, yes. Absolutely, yeah. So first of all, there are a number of non-sovereign data assets that there is an opportunity to bring them together to expand the data lake. But when we talk about really moving the needle, it's about these sovereign data partnerships. And for me, the key question is, what is the partnership construct to unlock that value and to unlock the motivation? And I've got, in my mind, I've got kind of 4 key themes. Number one is simply if data sets combine, or let me put it another way. What's the end state vision? The end state vision is multiple data sets coming together to enhance statistical power such that when you do your therapeutic area cuts, you've got more sample size, right, which is going to help with accelerating precision therapies. The second is, the more data you have, the more effectively you can train your AI algorithms. So if that's the end state vision, then I'd say to unlock sovereign partnerships, I'd say 4 things. Number one, bringing these data sets together will accelerate precision therapies. We know, particularly in the Eastern Hemisphere, we have the challenge of the reference genome being a very Caucasian bias, and we need to change that, number one. Number two is to unlock investment. We've seen with Regeneron and the Treveta deal, we've seen with our deals with pharma companies, pharma's willingness to finance the cost of sequencing, right, as a way of unlocking economic value. The third is, once you've got the data into your environment, to then provide a copy of that data back for translational research to support public health, population health, PRS type initiatives. And then the fourth for me is really about economic development. You know, imagine a world where those data sets have been used to identify targets that are congruent with an Emirati reference and the Emirati population, to then be able to localize clinical trials and to be able to localize drug manufacturing, gene therapy manufacturing. To me, that's the aspiration, and that's pretty exciting.
Great. That's a great summary, Kamraan. I think it brings this discussion to a beautiful close. And if I can summarize it in just 30 seconds, there's this very strong theme of having a core platform, the Emirati Genome Program, that offers value clinically, that has the potential to be connected into a research domain where there is the opportunity to engage industry in the form of pharma and biotech that can help accelerate the translation of precision medicines, that can be tailored, to your point, Kamraan, to the nuances of specific populations, in our case to the Emirati population, that supports this overall agenda of interweaving these different stakeholders that are sat around this panel. And I thank you for your time and demonstrating the perspectives that can all be brought together around a common theme. So thank you very much for your time. Please, would you put your hands together for the panel?